Jason Ford stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Celestial Fang, his 6 eyes fixed on the star map. The blue glow of the holographic display reflected off his scaled skin, creating an almost comical disco ball effect, one that none of his subordinates would dare mention unless they had a sudden desire to experience the vacuum of space without the benefit of a spacesuit. Another border skirmish with the humans had him seething. Ethan Collins' mandibles clicked together in frustration. Do they have nothing better to do than prod at our defenses like bored juveniles poking a sleeping grav beast? Samantha Pierce, who had earned her promotion solely for her remarkable ability to stay dry when Ford raised his voice, cleared her throat. The report says, they've claimed another asteroid belt in the Proxima sector, sir. Of course they have, Ford sneered, his laugh sounding like metal being torn apart. Barely 2 centuries into space travel and they're already collecting cosmic rocks like they're trinkets. What's next? Will they start naming stars after their pets? The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Ford's sarcasm was notorious across the Galactic Confederation, as was his explosive temper. The Galactic Council is requesting your presence at an emergency meeting, George King announced, her tendrils twisting with anxiety. Something about a new human warship. Well, that's just great, Ford muttered, throwing all 4 of his arms into the air. First, my breakfast synthesizer makes something that tastes like recycled engine lubricant. Then my favorite war moon gets scratched during routine maneuvers. And now I have to sit through another council meeting about those hairless beings. The Ithrians-human conflict had been simmering for decades. Officially, it was about territorial disputes and resource allocation. Unofficially, it had all started when a human diplomat had mistaken the Ithrian Supreme Leader's egg sac for a decorative cushion during first contact negotiations. Relations had been tense ever since. What's so special about this warship? Ford demanded, his crest flaring purple with irritation. Samantha Pierce hesitated, her voice crackling with uncertainty. The preliminary reports are concerning, sir. They say it violates at least 17 Galactic Confederation weapon treaties, and that's just from the long-range scans. Humans building something that actually works? Ford scoffed. That's a joke. But despite his dismissive tone, a slight unease stirred in his secondary stomach. The humans had always been unpredictable, but lately they'd been strangely quiet along the borders. Too quiet. Set course for the Council Spire, Ford ordered. And someone get me a decent cup of fermented root juice before I arrive. Or I swear by the 7 moons, heads will roll. Literally. As the Celestial Fang shifted course, Ford couldn't shake the feeling that something unprecedented was about to happen. In his 300 years of military service, unprecedented had never once been associated with anything pleasant. The Galactic Council meeting was just as Ford had imagined, long, tedious, and filled with enough hot air to inflate a small moon. Representatives from 27 species argued in circles while Ford fantasized about spacing them all. Finally, he roared, silencing the chamber. If this human vessel is such a threat, why are we wasting time talking about it instead of doing something about it? His counselor, William Scott, a gelatinous blob species that communicated through color changes and bubbling noises, turned an alarming shade of purple. Commander Ford, your direct approach is noted, but... A deafening alarm cut through the chamber, followed by a panicked voice over the comms. Unknown vessel approaching the Council Spire. All defensive systems activate. This is not a drill. Well, what a shocking development, Ford drawled, already heading for the exit. Who could have possibly foreseen that while we debated, the humans would act? Oh, wait, I did. Aboard the emergency shuttle back to his flagship, Ford received his first visual of the human warship. The datapad nearly slipped from his claws. That's impossible, he muttered, for once without any sarcasm. The Thunderbolt, as the humans had so predictably named it, defied all conventional warship design. Where Confederation vessels preferred elegant, practical configurations, this monstrosity appeared to be a chaotic mashup of every weapon system imaginable, bolted together with no regard for aesthetics, or, it seemed, the laws of physics. Sir, Luke Matthews' voice crackled over the comms, the human vessel is hailing all Confederation ships. They're requesting permission to demonstrate their new defense system as a goodwill gesture. Oh, and next, they'll invite us over for tea and cookies, Ford snorted. Tell me, Lieutenant, do I look like I hatched yesterday? No, sir, you look quite seasoned. Seasoned? I'll season you into next week. Ford's threat was cut short as the Thunderbolt suddenly flared to life, its energy readings spiking off every chart. The shuttle systems flickered before stabilizing. "What in the seven hells was that?" Ford demanded. The answer came quickly. An asteroid, once drifting harmlessly near the council spire, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just a faint shimmer left in the void where it had been. Ford's mandibles hung open. They disintegrated it completely. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Ford found himself utterly speechless. The implications were terrifying. If the humans could do that to an asteroid, "Sir?" Noah Brooks prompted nervously. "Your orders?" Ford's eyes narrowed. "Get me everything we have on human technology now, and someone find me that cursed root juice." As the shuttle docked with the celestial fang, Ford stood at the viewport, staring at the human warship. It hung there, deceptively still, like a predator waiting to strike. "What are you playing at, humans?" he muttered. And more importantly, "How in the blazing cosmos did you build that?" Ford asked slowly, disbelief lacing his words. "The humans, the same species that still finds endless amusement in videos of their young tripping over themselves, have somehow created technology that even our brightest minds can't even fathom?" Olivia Harris shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her seven-sensory appendages. Unlike most Krieger, she held a certain respect for humans, a dangerous sentiment she typically kept hidden around the commander. "Not exactly incomprehensible," Siri corrected, her voice calm as she displayed a hologram of the Thunderbolt in the flagship's analysis chamber. "It's more improbable, extremely improbable." "Well, that's just fantastic," Ford scoffed, his laugh echoing off the cold, metallic walls. "Please do enlighten me with your fascinating findings." Luke Matthews took a deep, steadying breath. "The human vessel seems to utilize a quantum displacement field. In layman's terms, engineer," Ford cut him off sharply. "I don't have time for your technical mumbo-jumbo, Luke Matthews." "They figured out how to move things between realities completely," Luke Matthews finished, almost reverently. Silence hung in the room. Even Ford's usual biting sarcasm was momentarily silenced. "That asteroid didn't just disintegrate," Luke Matthews continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It was shifted into another dimension entirely intact." "That's impossible," Ford snapped, his mandibles clicking together anxiously. Even the ancient ones couldn't manipulate dimensional barriers. "Apparently someone forgot to warn the humans," Sophia Carter muttered, before slapping a claw over her mouth in horror at her accidental insubordination. To everyone's surprise, Ford actually chuckled. A genuine hearty laugh, not his usual mocking bark. "Ha, well that was a good one, junior engineer." And sadly, accurate. The engineering team exchanged confused glances. Commander Ford actually appreciating humor? Perhaps the human technology had already begun affecting reality itself. "What else have you discovered?" Ford demanded, suddenly shifting back into a more serious posture. Luke Matthews gestured toward another section of the hologram. "Their power source is bizarre, sir. It appears to be drawing energy directly from the quantum foam of space-time itself." "What?" Ford raised his voice, stunned. "That's like trying to power your ship by drinking from the cosmic ocean." "The energy requirements alone would be infinite." Luke Matthews nodded solemnly. "And, theoretically, so is their power supply." Ford slumped into a chair, all four of his arms hanging uselessly. "No wonder they've violated 17 treaties. They've completely disregarded the laws of physics." "There's more, sir," Treza Carter added, emboldened by her commander's earlier reaction. She projected an analysis of the ship's outer material composition. "None of the materials match anything in our database. The ship seems to adapt at the molecular level, self-healing, self-reconfiguring." "Let me guess," Ford sighed, rubbing his temples. "It also brews the perfect cup of coffee and tells great jokes?" "No, sir," Luke Matthews replied, his expression earnest, completely missing the sarcasm. "But our simulations indicate it could withstand a direct hit from our most powerful weapons without even a scratch." Ford stared at the rotating hologram of the Thunderbolt, its deceptively simple human design belying its mind-boggling capabilities. For a species that had only been venturing into space for a mere few centuries, this leap in technology was not just unprecedented, it was unnatural. "There has to be a catch," Ford muttered, his voice low. "Nobody, especially not humans, just stumbles upon technology this advanced." "Actually, sir," Luke Matthews hesitated, his voice taking on a cautious tone. "There's something odd. These energy signatures." He pointed to pulsating points on the hologram. "Here and here, They're erratic, unstable even. Meaning? Ford asked, his eyes narrowing, his crest darkening to a deep purple as he tried to piece it together. Meaning that either the humans don't fully understand what they've created or the ship isn't functioning as intended, Luke Matthews replied grimly. Ford's eyes tightened in thought. Find me a weakness, engineers. Anything we can exploit. Because if this human vessel is truly as powerful as it seems, the balance of power in the galaxy has just shifted dramatically. And not, he added with a dark smile, in our favor. Political fallout and galactic council debates. The audacity! Ambassador William Scott's voice bellowed through the emergency council session, his gelatinous body shaking with indignation. First, the humans refused to register their technology with the Confederation Patent Office. Now they're parading it in front of our very headquarters. This is an outright provocation. Ford slouched further in his seat, his mind swimming with frustration. He wondered if it was physically possible for his eyes to roll completely out of his head. He'd been forced to sit through this emergency session where 27 species had spent 3 hours essentially talking in circles, offering no useful solutions. Perhaps, suggested the Terran ambassador Rebecca Miller with infuriating calmness, if the Confederation hadn't rejected our last 16 applications for advanced weaponry patents, claiming them too primitive to warrant protection, we wouldn't have had to demonstrate our capabilities so dramatically. So you admit this is a threat? William Scott jiggled triumphantly. Miller smiled, a strange, unsettling human smile that never failed to make Ford's scales itch. Not a threat, Ambassador, a correction of misconceptions. Enough with the dancing around with pretty words, Ford growled, leaning forward, his tone shifting from sarcasm to cold seriousness. Let's address the quantum-shifted elephant in the room. This thunderbolt of yours violates not just our treaties, but the fundamental principles of known physics. How did you build it? Who helped you? Because we all know humans don't create technology this advanced without outside assistance. The council chamber erupted into murmurs of agreement. Ambassador Rebecca Miller's smile remained unchanged. Commander, she said with a wry smile, your species took 10,000 years to develop faster than light travel. Humans did it in less than 3 centuries. Perhaps you're not the best judge of our capabilities. Burn, someone murmured under their breath. She got you there, Commander? Noah Brooks whispered, shrinking back as Ford shot him a venomous glare. I'm sorry, Counselor George King bubbled nervously, his colors shifting to a lavender hue. But the question remains, Ambassador Miller, what does Earth intend to do with this technology? Absolutely nothing, she replied coolly, her voice unwavering. Unless provoked, the Thunderbolt is a defensive vessel only. A defensive vessel? Ford scoffed, his voice laced with disbelief. One that can make asteroids disappear? Next, you'll tell us your planet killers are just mining equipment. I move for an immediate inspection of the human vessel, declared Ambassador Alexander Moore of the Ithrian Hive, his antenna twitching nervously. By a neutral third party, he added, his voice seconded by a chorus of at least 12 other voices. Ambassador Miller gave a composed nod, her tone smooth and calculated. We welcome inspection by any species not currently engaged in territorial disputes with Earth. That leaves, let me think, absolutely none of you. The chamber erupted into chaos as accusations shot through the air faster than photon torpedoes, with threats of sanctions, blockades, and at least one declaration of ritual combat to the death from the Zorni representative. Ford's gaze never left the human ambassador. She was too calm, too prepared, almost as though this very scenario had been predicted, perhaps even desired. Silence, High Counselor George King bellowed, his size expanding dramatically as he grew agitated. We will take a brief recess to consider our options. This council has faced crises before, and we will navigate this one with wisdom and restraint. As the delegates filed out, Ford found himself standing beside Ambassador Miller in the Grand Corridor. This little power play of yours won't end well, he warned in a low, measured voice. On the contrary, Commander, she replied with that infuriating smile still firmly in place. I think it's playing out exactly as I expected. For the first time, Ford's crest darkened with a growing sense of unease. Maybe, just maybe, the humans had been underestimated, not just in terms of technology, but in their strategic depth as well. And that realization, far more than any warship, was what truly unsettled him. Do the unexpected, a battle that changes everything. Ford had just finished his fourth cup of fermented root juice when the alarm blared, its shrill sound like an ice pick through his already aching skull. "What now?" he roared, stumbling onto the bridge of the Celestial Fang, his irritation outweighing his usual poise. Lieutenant Michael Davis's face was pale, his expression one of panic. "Sir, the Vraknar Dominion has launched an attack on the human vessel." "They what?" Ford's words came out as a snarl, the sudden gravity of the situation snapping him to attention. "Those scale-headed idiots. The council hasn't even finished deliberating." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the massive Vraknar battlecruiser Void Splitter advancing on the comparatively tiny Thunderbolt. Behind it, 5 Vraknar destroyers moved into attack formation. The Vraknar ambassador wasn't at the recess meeting, Samantha Pierce, the communications officer, noted, her tendrils curling with anxiety. Grand Admiral KX Khan must have decided to take matters into his own claws. That bloodthirsty maniac, Ford hissed in frustration. He's about to start an interstellar war. "Sir," Weapons Officer David Smith interjected, his voice tight with tension, "the Vraknar are powering up their main cannon array. They're targeting the human ship's propulsion systems." "Ah, of course," Ford muttered bitterly. "Target the engines first, then move in for the kill. Classic Khan, as predictable as a quantum clock." The bridge crew watched in grim silence as the Vraknar cruiser fired its first salvo, a searing stream of plasma that should have torn any normal ship to shreds. But the Thunderbolt didn't even attempt to dodge. "They're not moving," CZ Nar whispered in horror. "Are their systems already disabled?" Ford leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his mind racing. "No, they're waiting for something." The plasma stream struck the human vessel dead center and then vanished. Not a single trace of damage, no explosion, no flicker in the Thunderbolt's energy signature. It was as if the entire salvo had never existed. "Impossible," David Smith muttered. "That was enough firepower to vaporize a small moon." "The quantum displacement field," Ford murmured, a realization dawning on him. "It's not just their offensive weapon, it's their shield technology." The Vraknar, stunned by this development, hesitated before unleashing their full arsenal. Every weapon on all 6 ships fired simultaneously at the lone human vessel, creating a light show so dazzling that several of the bridge crew had to shield their eyes. Again, the barrage simply disappeared. "They're absorbing it all!" Samantha Pierce's voice cracked, full of disbelief. "No," Ford whispered, his blood running cold. "They're not absorbing the attacks, they're sending them somewhere else." Just as his words hung in the air, the Thunderbolt began to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light, energy arcing across its hull in strange, mesmerizing patterns. "They've stored the energy somehow," Ford said, his voice heavy with dread. "And now they're going to—" But he didn't finish the sentence. A single pulse of energy radiated from the human vessel, not a weapon discharge, just a simple wave of energy that expanded outward, like ripples in a pond. The moment it touched the first Vraknar destroyer, the ship simply vanished. No explosion, no debris, just gone. As if it had never existed. As if it never was there at all, Cizinar whispered in stunned awe. The pulse continued its unrelenting expansion, touching each Vraknar vessel in turn. One by one, they disappeared. No warning, no sign. When it reached the mighty Void Splitter, Grand Admiral KX Khan's flagship hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as though the sheer mass of the cruiser provided some minimal resistance, before it too blinked out of existence. 6 warships, over 12,000 Vraknar warriors, gone, in less than 30 seconds. The bridge of the Celestial Fang was completely still, the only sound the soft beeping of consoles and the ragged breaths of the crew. "Where did they go?" Samantha Pierce finally dared to ask. Ford sank slowly into his command chair, his body heavy with the weight of the realization. Another dimension, another reality, perhaps. Somewhere worse. He shuddered involuntarily, despite himself. But definitely not here. "Sir, we're being hailed," Noah Brooks announced, his voice almost a whisper. It's the Thunderbolt." "Oh, wonderful," Ford muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's chat with the beings who just removed an entire battle group from existence." Despite his words, there was a tremor in his voice. "Put them on screen, Lieutenant." The view screen flickered to reveal the bridge of the Thunderbolt. It was surprisingly simple, clean, functional, but lacking the grandeur one might expect from such a terrifyingly powerful warship. At its center stood a human female with dark skin and close-cropped silver hair, dressed in a simple blue uniform adorned with minimal insignia. "Commander Ford," she said, nodding in greeting. "Captain Julia Anderson of the Earth Defense Forces. I apologize for the disruption." Disruption? Ford couldn't help but laugh, the sound nearly cracking under the strain of hysteria. "Is that what you call making 6 warships vanish? A disruption?" Captain Julia Anderson's expression remained impassive. "The Vrakner vessels have been relocated to a parallel dimension, approximately 3 light years from their original position. Their life support systems remain functional. They will find their way back eventually." "So you just sent them on an interdimensional timeout?" Ford asked, astonished. The corner of Julia Anderson's mouth twitched slightly, a subtle human gesture that Ford had learned to recognize as amusement. "That's an oversimplification, but essentially correct." Ford studied her with sharp intensity. There was no sign of triumph in her demeanor, no gloating, no arrogance. Just calm, methodical professionalism. It was unsettling, more so than any overt display of power or aggression could have been. "Why not just destroy them?" he asked bluntly. "Because we don't need to," she replied, her voice still measured. "The Thunderbolt was designed as a deterrent, Commander, not as a weapon of mass destruction. That's a deterrent that can erase entire fleets from reality. Sounds like overkill." Julia Anderson nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but effective. Wouldn't you agree?" The implications of what he had just witnessed began to sink into Ford's thoughts. He realized then that the galaxy had changed, irrevocably. The Krieger, the Vraknar, even the Confederation, none of them could stand against this kind of technology. "The council session resumes in 1 hour, Ford said, his voice steady, but heavy with realization. "I imagine you'll be getting a different reception this time." "That was precisely the point, Commander," Captain Julia Anderson replied, her tone calm and resolute. For once in his career, Ford had no sarcastic comeback. Commander Ford's confrontation with the human captain. The council reconvened as scheduled, but the atmosphere had shifted significantly. Where once there had been outrage and indignation, now there was only hushed, fearful murmuring. The Thunderbolt's demonstration of power had done in minutes what hours of diplomatic wrangling could not. It had captured the undivided attention of every species in the Confederation. Ford, however, had no interest in the political drama. As ambassadors stammered through revised positions and High Counselor George King desperately tried to maintain order, Ford quietly slipped away from the session. "Sir, where are you going?" Lieutenant Noah Brooks hurried after him, clearly concerned. "The council hasn't dismissed yet." "Oh, I'm sorry," Ford said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Should I stay and listen to 27 species debate how best to surrender? Or perhaps we can discuss which shade of white our new flag should be. But sir, protocol dictates—" "Protocol can kiss my scaly posterior, Lieutenant," Ford snapped. "I'm going to have a little chat with our human friend alone." Lieutenant Michael Davis's eyes widened in surprise. "That's not advisable, sir." "Neither is letting a species of evolved primates dominate the galaxy with technology we barely understand," Ford retorted, his voice low and sharp. "But here we are." Captain Julia Anderson had been easy to find. She had been granted temporary quarters in the diplomatic wing of the Council spire, and she made no effort to hide her presence. Either she feared nothing, or she was monumentally overconfident. Ford was betting on the latter. He found her in the observation lounge, gazing out at the stars with a steaming cup of human coffee in hand. She didn't seem surprised when he entered. "Commander Ford," she said, not turning to face him. "I was wondering when you'd come." "Were you now? How delightful that I'm so predictable," Ford replied, stepping toward her. His towering form was reflected in the transparent aluminum viewport beside her much smaller human silhouette, both of them gazing out at the galaxy. "You're about to conquer it," Ford commented, his voice almost rhetorical. Julia Anderson sipped her coffee, unfazed. "We have no interest in conquest, Commander." "Oh, that's what every empire says just before expansion," Ford said with a sardonic chuckle. His laugh echoed softly in the empty lounge as he added, "Next, you'll tell me humans only want peace and prosperity for all. Is that so hard to believe, from the species that almost destroyed their own planet 7 times in their brief history?" "Yes," Julia Anderson said with an almost unnerving calm, finally turning to meet his gaze. "Perhaps that's precisely why we understand the value of peace better than most." Ford leaned in, his massive frame looming over her. "Cut the diplomatic dreck, Captain. What do humans really want? Territory? Resources? Revenge for that unfortunate egg sac incident?" To his surprise, Julia Anderson laughed, genuinely, warmly. The sound was disarming and momentarily threw Ford off balance. "The egg sac incident has been forgiven, Commander, though not entirely forgotten," she said, a playful glint in her eyes. "Then what?" Ford asked, his voice growing more pointed. "Why build a ship that could destabilize the entire galactic balance of power?" "Insurance," Julia Anderson replied, placing her coffee cup down with deliberate care. Humanity spent its first century in space being patronized, underestimated, and marginalized by the Confederation. Our technology was primitive, our culture barbaric, our concerns dismissed as childish. So this is just about hurt feelings? Ford clicked his mandibles in disbelief. "This is about survival," Julia Anderson countered, her voice hardening. "Every species in the Confederation has, at some point, contemplated how to deal with the human problem. Yes, Commander, we have our intelligence networks, too." Ford's crest darkened involuntarily. The humans knew about those classified discussions. "The Thunderbolt ensures that whatever solution you collectively devise," she continued, her voice steady, "won't involve military action. We've removed that option from the table and replaced it with fear," Ford hissed, the realization sinking in. "You've made every species in the galaxy terrified of humans." Julia Anderson's expression softened slightly. "Fear was never the goal, Commander. Respect was. Perhaps in time that fear will fade, and genuine cooperation will begin. Or perhaps," she added with a slight shrug, "some species might decide that destroying humanity before you build more of these vessels is worth any cost." "They're welcome to try," Julia Anderson added with chilling certainty. "But I think you, of all people, understand what would happen." Ford stared at her, his mind racing as he finally saw the human captain clearly, not as a representative of a young, impulsive species, but as a formidable adversary worthy of genuine respect and, yes, fear. "The Council will vote to recognize Earth as a major power," Ford said slowly, his voice weighed with grim understanding. "You've achieved your objective, Captain." "That's just the beginning, Commander," Julia Anderson replied, turning back to the stars. "The real work starts now." Resolution and the new galactic order. 3 rotations later, the Galactic Confederation convened for what would later be regarded as the defining moment in galactic diplomacy. It was the day humanity's thunderbolt changed everything. Forever. Representatives from all 27 member species filed into the Grand Chamber with an uncharacteristic air of solemnity. Even the typically boisterous Zorni delegation maintained a rare, respectful silence. Ford, begrudgingly present as the Krieger military representative, slouched in his seat, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The tension was thick, hanging in the air like a toxic gas. It emanated from every delegate, ambassador, and aide, every species except one. The human delegation sat at their newly enlarged table, their posture relaxed but alert. Ambassador Rebecca Miller and Captain Julia Anderson conversed quietly, occasionally exchanging what appeared to be genuine smiles. "How can they look so casual?" Ford muttered to Lieutenant Noah Brooks. "You'd think they were discussing dinner plans, not remaking the entire galactic structure." "Perhaps because they know exactly what's coming next, sir," Krasnar suggested, his tone cautious. "Don't we all?" Ford replied, his laugh drawing several uneasy glances. "The Council will recognize humanity as a major power, establish new non-aggression protocols, and then we'll all pretend this was the plan all along." High Counselor George King rippled to a ceremonial shade of blue as the session began. "Esteemed colleagues, today we gather to address recent developments and chart a path forward that ensures peace and stability for all Confederation members." Translation: "How to stop the humans from sending us all to alternate dimensions," Ford whispered, loud enough for a few delegates to hear. Several nodded in agreement. What followed was exactly the diplomatic theater Ford had predicted. The Council unanimously voted to recognize Earth as a major galactic power. New treaties were hastily drawn up to accommodate human interests in disputed territories. Research initiatives were established to foster technological cooperation, though it was clear to everyone that this really meant figuring out how the humans did it. Throughout the proceedings, the human delegation accepted each concession with gracious nods and thoughtful questions, never once gloating or pushing for more. Their restraint was somehow more unnerving than the presence of the Thunderbolt itself. When the formal session concluded, Captain Julia Anderson approached the central podium. A hush fell over the chamber. "On behalf of Earth," she began, her voice calm and authoritative. "I thank the Confederation for its wisdom and adaptability. However, I would like to address certain concerns that I know many of you harbor." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "First, the Thunderbolt remains the only vessel of its kind. We have no plans to construct a fleet of quantum displacement ships." Relief rippled through the assembly, but it was quickly followed by confusion. "One is quite sufficient," she added, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Second," she continued, cutting through the murmurs before they could escalate, "we understand the fear our technology has generated. To that end, Earth proposes a new Galactic Security Council with rotating membership from all Confederation species to oversee the deployment of the Thunderbolt and any future defensive technologies." Ford leaned forward, his crest darkening in suspicion. This wasn't what he had anticipated. "The Thunderbolt will serve not just Earth, but the entire Confederation," Julia Anderson announced, her voice steady and unwavering. "Any threat to galactic peace, whether external or internal, can be addressed with minimal loss of life through our quantum displacement technology." "They're offering to be the Confederation's enforcers?" Noah Brooks whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. "Brilliant," Ford replied, reluctant admiration in his tone. "In a single move, they've shifted from potential conquerors to invaluable protectors. We can't attack them, but now we can't function without them." The chamber erupted into heated debate, the room alive with a cacophony of voices. Some saw it as a transparent power grab, others as a sincere effort to bring unprecedented stability. As the discussion raged on, Ford found himself stepping away from the chaos, heading toward the refreshment area where Captain Julia Anderson stood alone. Her calm demeanor, as always, was an infuriating constant in the storm of uncertainty. "Well played, Captain," Ford acknowledged, pouring himself a generous cup of root juice. "You've managed to terrify us and make us dependent on you, all in the same week. I'm almost impressed." "Thank you, Commander," Julia Anderson replied smoothly, her expression warm yet controlled. "Coming from you, that's high praise indeed." "Don't push your luck, human," Ford warned, mandibles clicking in what could have been amusement. "One question, though," Ford pressed, the edge of suspicion creeping into his voice. "Your engineers, do they truly understand the technology they've created? Our analysis revealed instabilities in the quantum field." For the first time, Julia Anderson's composure faltered, the tiniest crack in her otherwise unshakable poise. "We understand enough." "As I suspected," Ford muttered, downing his drink in one swift motion. "You're playing with forces beyond your comprehension. One miscalculation, one power surge, and you could tear a hole in reality itself. That's precisely why we need the combined scientific expertise of the Confederation," Julia Anderson countered smoothly. "Cooperation isn't just diplomatically sound, it's existentially necessary." Ford stared at her, a realization settling in his mind. "You clever, devious primates." He shook his head, marveling at their strategy. "You never intended to rule through fear, did you? You needed our help all along." "Let's call it mutually assured survival," Julia Anderson offered with a sly smile. Ford threw back his head and laughed, a genuine laugh that turned heads throughout the chamber. "In 300 years of military service, I've never been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. I almost wish we had gone to war with you humans. It would have been entertaining." "I prefer this outcome," Julia Anderson smiled, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a brief hesitation, Ford took her small hand in his. "To the new galactic order," he said with the faintest trace of sarcasm, though there was something almost respectful in his tone. "May we all survive humanity's helpful protection." As the Council formally adopted Earth's proposal, Ford couldn't shake the thought that lingered in the back of his mind. The humans hadn't just built the ultimate warship, they had created the ultimate peace. And somehow, that was the most terrifying achievement of all. Resolution and the new galactic order. 3 rotations later, the Galactic Confederation convened for what would later be regarded as the defining moment in galactic diplomacy. It was the day humanity's Thunderbolt changed everything, forever.